So welcome to the Live Beyond podcast. As you know, we always try and find people that are incredibly inspirational, that have gone beyond anything else and survived and gotten to the other side. I mean, we always fashion this around that wonderful journey of getting beyond the finish line. But I think Live Beyond is also about finding those incredible human beings that are doing extraordinary things every single day. So today we've got a wonderful guest with us that's going to be chatting to us a little bit about her journey and the work that she's done, Natalie Beveridge. But without further ado, let me also welcome Langa Lloyd Marlow.
How are you doing? Are you well?
I'm good. Getting ready for Ironman 2024, chasing the Tri-Series this year. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Are you back in a training?
Back in training, back in the water, back on the road, both on bike and running.
Yeah.
I've gained 112 kilograms, so I've got about 20 to shed by the Mossel Bay Ironman, but hopefully I might be able to get down about 8 before PE. But I'm excited.
Yeah, looking forward to walking that journey with you again. It's quite exciting doing it for A Promise to Andre. And where it's brought us. I mean, look at where we are now.
Look at us now.
Yeah. All right. Should we get into it?
Yeah. So Natalie Beveridge is the founder of the Tiny the Mighty movement, which she started in 2018 when her son Kieran was diagnosed with childhood cancer at 8 months old. She believes in the power of making active choices and turning pain into purpose and healing. Just our kind of person, dedicated to raising awareness about childhood cancer and the critical need for blood and stem cell donations in South Africa. And through her advocacy efforts, Natalie has provided hope and support to many families facing similar challenges and has created a lasting legacy for her son. And she sits here with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're honored to have you here, and thank you for making time to come and chat to us about your wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Normally, how we start the podcast is that we, just on a light note, trying to know who the person is and who is Natalie. Would you tell us a bit about yourself, where you were born, grew up?
Sure. So if we go to the meaning of Natalie, my husband would argue that it means somebody who has high verbal expression and likes to talk a lot.
Yes.
I suppose if you have to look at the name of Natalie in the journals, it talks about the birth of Christ and, like new beginnings and celebration. So in many ways I say to my husband, well, if you go Bon Natal, and that's generally Merry Christmas in Italian,
right.
I am the gift, right?
Yes.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. You're beautiful.
That's awesome. Is that the meaning of the name, Natalie?
Of Natalie, yeah.
What's the origin of the name? Is it
it's
English?
Latin.
Is it Latin?
It's Latin,
okay,
and it
right.
means the birth of Christ.
Right,
But
yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is that I tend to approach every single day with unbridled enthusiasm, and I always try and find a gift in every single day. It's been like that since I was born.
Okay.
And once again, like I said, I talk a lot. So I think the ability to actually go out into the world with that kind of passion and enthusiasm and find learnings and gifts in every single day is something that I'm really, really grateful for, that I've got that perspective in life. So if you want to know a little bit about Natalie, everything's a learning, everything is a growth curve. I love meeting people. And growing up in Krugersdorp, it was an interesting place to be. Coming out of the apartheid era into the new democratic South Africa, seeing how things changed, getting the opportunities to meet new people and to engage in a world which used to be very, closed. And being able to
insular and protected, right?
Insular and protected.
Yeah.
And being able to be young enough to be able to embrace everything without judging it.
Right.
It's amazing. And so, if you want to know a little bit about me, that's how it started.
Yeah.
And here I am now, ripe old age of 40, and
you're 40 years young.
40 years young.
Love
That's
it,
so
love it.
beautiful.
I feel like 40 is like when you, it's like, it's another 21st. It's different, right? Because,
Yeah.
you know, you go between 21 and like 39 and you still feel young. And 40, it's almost like somebody says, you know, gives you a bit of a clap and says, wake up, you know, life is happening. And it's a renewal. It almost feels like a renewal of life where, okay, I think I'm mature now. I should stop drinking 2 tequilas
Yeah.
and have 1.
You can't recover like you used to when you were younger.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So you and from growing up and from a very young age, you had a very positive outlook on life, in general, right? What influenced that? And what is it? Your parents, the way they brought you up? Was there any inspiration that?
Look, I think obviously your upbringing and your circumstances play a big role. I do think that there's power in active choice and being able to drive your frustrations or your feeling of I'm being left out or I'm not getting the same opportunities as everyone else. There is an opportunity for you to take an active stance in being a participant and an active member of your community or your society and actually get involved.
Yeah.
So my mum and dad weren't particularly well off. My dad had a numerous amount of health challenges when I was growing up. So there were often many things that we had to sacrifice. So if it was school camps or dancing competitions or the latest costumes or the latest gear or really lavish birthday parties, you know, those weren't necessarily always within our reach. But at the same time, I didn't ever want for anything.
Yeah.
And I do think that the perspective of realizing it's not about the material things, and it's actually about the important things, and health ultimately is your ultimate wealth, right?
Yeah.
If it fails you when you're very young, you don't realize what the economic, the mental, the emotional, psychological impact that it has, and especially when you're raising a young family. So I think the positive outlook was something that we just had to foster in our family.
Yeah.
Because if you wanted to be a victim and roll over and go, oh, well, you know.
And it always happens like that, right? Especially when you find yourselves in an environment where, you know, your parents are hardworking, you know, both, you know, they were almost like white collar parents that are the hardworking. And then you're also surrounded by all of this wealth, right? So, you know, surrounded by the rich kids, either from school or whatever. You have to make an active choice to say that's either going to make me or break me, right? Because I'm going to sit here and you say, you know, feel sorry for yourself and roll over. But it also teaches you resilience, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you realize that, okay, these guys are very wealthy. They've got everything. They've got the latest techies, latest this, latest that, latest whatever. But not many of them are happy. Yet with the little that you have and with the love that you raised with, you know, by your parents, you almost feel full and you're like, you know, okay, we're not that bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember taking toys that I had and we would set up a little table outside on our street and we would actually sell them, almost like a car boot sale kind of vibe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you would get, you know, the various people who drive past and give you R2 or R5, and we really thought we were winning.
Yeah.
But I think it's that fostering of the not the instant gratification generation where I want something, I get it now, especially in the digital generation that I'm seeing now. You want something online, you can buy it at a click of a finger.
Yes.
It doesn't teach you grit and it doesn't teach you the ability to work for something because everything is easily accessible.
Yes.
Right.
So growing up in Krugersdorp, obviously a very different era, you know, being able to actually realize the value of hard work, active choices, not being a victim, and actually having a positive outlook. And I think that has put me in good stead in terms of where I am today and how I've overcome certain challenges. I do wonder if we emotionally and sort of stunting the generations that are coming now, where, you know, as soon as you push and throw a temper tantrum that you can't get the latest Roblox or Robux or Fortnite skins, you know, are we fostering that kind of sort of weak mentality?
Right, yeah.
Children that are growing up now, but I mean, that remains to be seen.
It's always a very interesting debate, though, around that, right? I mean, we always say, in our generation. I remember when I was I walked to school. When I think about it, I was probably walking about 7Ks.
So did I.
Nice little neighborhood. I mean, we get the same stuff. Oh, you're from the Val? Oh my God, where are you from? And we're like, but in our generation, we walk to school. I mean, I walked barefoot. I wanted to be like the little Afrikaans boys. I had like khaki shorts and whatever. I was like, what do I need shoes for?
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. I'd go to school and walk from Berith Park all the way to Parkridge. And I was young. I was very small. We lived in a much safer world, obviously, and what have you. But geez, we were happy, man. And it was just that feeling of freedom and being able to just live at that moment. But and I feel like our kids now, they don't appreciate it. But then they say, but they feel like we were abused. They look at us like, but you were abused. Don't bring your trauma. My daughter actually does it. Just don't bring your trauma into our lives. Into our lives. And, I feel like you guys were a bit abused, but I don't know. It's
Do you think they're less happier than we were, though?
I do think so, to a certain degree, because I think they've got a lot of information and they're having to mature a lot quicker than what we maybe needed to. I mean, my son, he's 8, and I mean, already 2 years ago, he was worried about a third world war.
Wow.
With Russia and Ukraine, because the TV is on and he's seeing stuff. And I'm like, why are you even worried about this? You're 6.
Yeah.
And I think those stresses come in and they start processing it, and they may not always have the tools or the emotional maturity to understand what's going on. So I don't know. I mean,
but they've also got degrees of comparison, right? Think about it. When we were living, we were just living. We were living for that moment, right?
Yeah, we were
But now
present.
they've got that cell phones. They're like, okay, but how's Lloyd living? How's Natalie living? You know what I mean? They can see that, them having and for us, we probably like, you're at home, there's a pool, you're jumping, you're taking pictures. And then, but Natalie's in Dubai. We also want to be in Dubai.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean? So they've got those degrees of comparison, whereas we had like an insular little life of ours where we were all the same. We couldn't see what other people were doing, etc. So I think maybe that also puts a little bit more pressure on them, and then maybe us as parents as well, because we've now got those degrees of comparison to say, what's everybody else doing? You know what I mean? It's sad. It's sad.
Do you have any siblings?
So I have a younger brother. He's also had his fair share of health challenges. So, growing up, it wasn't ever just like plain sailing. It wasn't we just were always out of the woods. So I think probably more medically astute than most families. But great guy, younger than me. He gets frustrated because I try and mother him. I still see him as 9, even though he's 36. But, I suppose that's just the nature that I am. I'm quite protective. I'm quite nurturing, always wanting to help, always wanting to get stuck in. So I suppose it can be quite tough on a younger sibling like that. But I also think because of what was happening in the family dynamic, and there was a lot of focus on my dad's health, and my mom was trying to work and look after my dad, and my dad was also working. I think there was a bit of strain. So I think you naturally just start taking on roles.
You were the firstborn, right?
Yeah.
Deputy parent.
Deputy
parent.
Yeah. And then fast forward.
Yep.
From a younger Natalie to meeting your partner.
Oh, yeah. So that was an interesting story. So, I was saying to Mac earlier, you get out of Krugersdorp and you think you want to marry someone and you want to get out of that small town mentality, which I definitely think I broke through from a young age. Started work when I was 18, studied part-time through UNISA to get my degree, because once again the medical challenges and the economic challenges meant that my folks couldn't send me to university, and ideally I wanted to go study medicine, so that wasn't even an option because we didn't have the funds.
Right, yeah.
So there is a part of me that wishes I could go back and be the 40-year-old medical student. But started working, got myself a degree, got into a management position, and then after a few years of being in the office automation industry, decided to switch gears and get into the software and technology IT industry.
Right.
And that was like learning Greek. I mean, I hated it. I had no clue what I was doing. I think I was 26 and I was like, what on earth have you done?
Right.
Love it to be young.
Yeah, you see, and that's the courage to make certain decisions and having that curiosity and growth mindset. So started in a organization, and there were terms and acronyms thrown at me, and
So this is like 14, 15 years ago, right?
Well, yeah, 15 years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
And I had no clue what I was doing, but anyway, I thought, let's wing it. and met my husband in the work environment. And about 1.5 years later, we started dating. I had started golf. I decided if I'm going to find somebody who's going to be a decent partner, I'm definitely not going to meet them in a club.
You know.
No, think about it. You're not going to meet them in a club, right?
Yes.
When they've had a few drinks and they're all on fire.
Yeah.
So I thought the only way I could actually spend some time with someone without anything being like dodge is
on the golf course.
On a golf course. So we'd go to the driving range, hit a few balls. You'd always get somebody who would come up and offer to show you your swing. Yeah. And my husband's a really good golfer. And
now husband, right? So it actually worked for you.
So it obviously worked, right? So the strategy was good, right? He phoned me up the one long weekend, and he was saying he was going away with a few of his friends to play golf. They were going to play 3 or 4 rounds, and he knew I was new to it. Would I like to join? And I was like, yeah, sure. And the rest is history.
Right, yeah. Oh, that's such a beautiful
When I leave here, guys, I'm going straight to the golf course. Not to find myself a husband, though. Maybe a wife. Lovely.
Yeah. And when did you get married then?
We got married in 2014, so it's 10 years.
Family?
10 years this year.
10 years this year?
Yeah, 10 years. Wow. So, I think you do get to the 7-year itch phase. But I mean, I think we had a lot of life thrown at us in those 15 years we've been together and 10 years married. He does have a daughter from his first marriage, Hannah. She is now 18. And so it was interesting because I got into a relationship with instant family. And it's actually interesting to see how someone navigates parenthood before you marry them.
Right, yeah.
Because often, you get married, have a kid, and then, the one is very much like a disciplinarian, and the other one is like, let it slide.
Right.
So it was good to sort of check the test case before we decided to sign up for the whole movie, right?
Yes. You had a pilot program.
So it's been an amazing 15 years. Lots of trials and tribulations thrown our way as well, but I think he's got a very similar mentality to me. You have to make those active, positive choices. The only way you can do anything is the ability to respond in a way that will actually move you forward. So I think probably a tick in the box for me. I think chose well.
Yeah. Are you one that believes that you continuously have to work on your relationship and your marriage to be in order to make it work?
I think human beings evolve, and if we were static and there was no growth, then you wouldn't need to work on anything. I think, your circumstances, your career aspirations. I left corporate. I was out of the industry for 7 years, went back in. Those stresses and strains, never mind childbirth and childbearing and kids and raising a family, you start growing at different rates. And sometimes you can grow apart and other times you grow together. But you need to be able to find the ability that even though you might be plodding different paths, it's for the benefit of the family and the unity there. You need to not lose sight of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Natalie, you speak about that 7-year age, and I find it quite interesting. How did you go beyond that 7-year age and find yourself 10 years into the marriage?
So I think the 7-year itch is just a term that people throw out there.
Yes.
But one of the things that happened, and it was quite a shocking turn of events for our family. My little boy, and I know you mentioned it earlier in the introduction, Kieran, he was diagnosed at 8 months old with childhood cancer.
8 months old?
8 months old. Oh. And it was probably one of the biggest blows any parent could ever hear, like your child, 8 months old, who's been perfectly healthy, has been diagnosed with childhood cancer. So, at the time, besides for the diagnosis, and as shocking as it was, you get social workers that will come and talk to you in the hospital. And one of the stats that they throw at you is childhood cancer is one of the leading causes of families breaking up and divorce. That's not even when you get further down the track, depending on whatever the health complications are and if ultimately you lose your child to childhood cancer. So, I mean, the 7-year itch wasn't really the issue. It was more around the fact that we were in a storm. And the only way we would have survived this is if we were a unit. So it wasn't about the 7-year itch. It was more around how do you keep the longevity and the sustainability of your family unit. in whatever way, shape or form that may be.
Yes.
And the only way you can do that is if you hold on to each other. And that's probably testament to why we've been together 10 years. But, geez, it's been a roller coaster.
So 8 months, your baby is 8 months old, has been perfectly healthy, and it's this bundle of joy that has now come and and come into the family and bring this sort of light of life, right? What happens? What happened on that day when you heard the news? What were there leading signs, or was there something that you were seeing that was any different with Kieran, or what led you going to the doctor and then getting that news in the first place?
So, like I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a family which had a few health challenges and complications. So I was quite medically astute, right? And my brother, about a year before my son was born, was diagnosed with cancer as well. So it wasn't that I was completely oblivious to something such as cancer, right? And I think it's an intuition thing. It's a mother's instinct.
Yes.
And I knew probably from the time I met Kieran, the day he was born. I don't know why. The first time I held him in my arms, I felt like I was on borrowed time. It sounds bizarre,
Yes.
but I remember looking at him almost like he was an old soul. I'd waited for him, but I knew that the time was limited. I don't know why, but there was this feeling like something was ticking. So you push it down, you sort of get on with life. Amazing little boy, piercing blue eyes, the light of the family. My son, who was 2.5 at the time, the eldest, couldn't say his name properly, so he called him Tiny Baby. And so he was known as Tiny Baby.
Yeah.
And everything was absolutely perfect. And at about 5 months old, we started picking up a few little niggles, but you think it's you transitioning them from breast milk into a bit of solids, could be a reaction to food. They're going through growth spurts. The eldest one might be bringing home 1 or 2 sniffs from school.
Yes.
So you don't really freak out about it. It's not like you're a first-time parent. But I have the platform and the privilege of being able to be on medical aid and going to doctors. So off you march to the ped. And I was with the pediatrician a lot. And I kept on voicing a concern about a particular little mark on his leg. It was on his right calf muscle, and it looked like a mosquito bite. And it sort of was there, disappeared, in amongst some of the chesty things that were going on. And this thing kept on growing at a rapid rate. And I thought the only thing that can grow like that is potentially cancer.
Yes.
So I'd already had that on my mind.
Yes.
And I mean, I'd been at the pediatrician a lot, and we even went for a sonar. And I kept on saying, I actually walked into his office the one day on the Monday morning, and I said I had a terrible dream. I dreamt my child, this thing on his leg is cancer. I dreamt that he has cancer. Please tell me that we are doing everything. And he was like, babies under the age of 1 don't get cancer. It's very, very rare.
Right.
And I said to him, well, my brother, his history, something's not adding up. And he sent me off to 2 specialists. Said the same thing to those specialists. Are you sure my baby doesn't have cancer? I've got a terrible feeling. And they looked at the recommendation letter from the ped as to, doing the basics, checking the milestones, checking, the basic things with regards to the baby. And they also assured me, this is right, it's a birthmark, he's fine. So on the day that we got the news from the pediatrician, I had, in desperation, gone to my GP that morning. And my son looked terrible. I mean, he was yellow, he was swollen, he hadn't slept for about 3 or 4 nights, screamed his head off. He was covered in a rash from head to toe. And I'd been to the ped the night before, and I said, something's wrong. And he was like, no, it's a viral thing, he'll be fine. I'm like, well, he looks terrible, he hasn't slept in 3 days. We did blood work with the GP, and immediately I got marched back to the pediatrician. And that's when the ugly truth was revealed, that my son had AML leukemia. And
this was diagnosed by a different doctor, right? This was your family doctor.
My family doctor actually did the blood work. My pediatrician delivered the news, but then again, the pediatrician was the treating doctor and the main doctor that we'd been seeing for the 8 months. So that day probably remains the worst day of my life. It probably is even worse, for me than the actual day that we lost him. But yeah, it will forever remain etched in my mind. And I still suffer around that time in the lead up to his diagnosis. So you almost like live prior to diagnosis and after diagnosis. You almost define your lives in those chapters.
Yes.
So yeah, it's no news any person ever wants to hear. And you do question everything about yourself, because as a mother, your role is to protect, nurture, make sure that your offspring thrive.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I wasn't voicing my concern.
Right.
The fact that it was dismissed made me actually think I was going mad. Like I was thinking of, I got postnatal depression. Am I
going crazy?
Going crazy. And it's funny, when I speak to other mothers who've gone through the same thing, most times when they think they're about to break and they're going crazy, that's when the diagnosis comes. And then they realize that gut instinct was right all along. Yeah, quite heavy for a Saturday morning.
No, we should talk about these things, because our stories change lives, and maybe there's somebody sitting out there that's got that instinct or got that feeling, and they don't know what to do with it. So you get this news. Were you with your husband at the time when you got the news, or were you alone and you had to go break it down to him?
No, so what had happened just prior to that, my husband had just lost his mother. She had passed away due to Alzheimer's, dementia. And he had only just gone back to work on that Monday, or I think the Tuesday. It was a Tuesday.
Yes.
So it was his first day back in the office after 2 weeks of being on compassionate leave. And we had a rough time with my son over the 2 weeks leading up to the diagnosis. And he had just arrived at the office, and my GP had phoned me to say, go straight to the hospital. And I phoned him. I said, I'm going to the hospital. I think you should come. And he said, I've just walked into the office. I haven't been here for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I said, I think you should come. When I got to the pediatrician's office, I could see he was buying time. He was waiting for my husband to arrive. And then he said, where is your husband? And I said, no, he's coming now. And I said, just tell me what it is. What's on the bloods? Because we had done the bloods earlier that morning. And that's when he broke the news to me. My husband was actually walking into his rooms. So when my husband walked into the office, I tend to talk a lot, and I tend to always have some sort of a comeback.
A chirp. Right.
Chirp.
I feel like it's a chirp.
I was completely winded.
Yeah.
I actually didn't even know how to put a sentence together. So when he walked into the room and he said, what? And he looked at my face, it was that look of absolute horror. And then I think the doctor had to repeat himself. And you almost go into the twilight zone. Like, you can't believe this is what you're hearing. And if I had enough strength, I probably would have jumped across the table and hit him. The doctor, not my husband. But it probably was one of the most surreal, heart-wrenching moments you've ever had in your life. So then we started the journey. So many questions, so many, reasons of, should have I done something different? Did I maybe drink too many cups of coffee when I was pregnant? Or did I cause it? Or, you start trying to unpack it, because human beings like to know there's cause and effect.
Yes.
If you can't draw a logical conclusion, it doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah.
And that was really, really hard. So, tough day.
Yeah.
I don't like Tuesdays for that reason. It was a Tuesday.
Yeah. And, I think for any parent, receiving that news and knowing that, one, he's still very, very small. He probably doesn't understand, and that's why he hasn't slept for the past 3 days. He's, screaming as a baby, because he can't express what he's going through. And you realize and feel like, as much as I know, there's absolutely nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
I think it's
Is that not
illusion.
probably one of the hardest things?
It's an illusion that we have control. Human beings like to believe that we predetermine everything and we can make sense of our world.
Yeah.
When you realize that actually sometimes things are absolutely outside of your control, that is one of the things that probably hurt you the most. And once, like you said, he was 8 months old, and one of the things I've learned subsequently is childhood cancer exhibits itself very differently in infants as to what it does in toddlers or children or teens. And the reason for that is, number one, the explosive growth the baby goes through, and if you just think from the time of conception to the time of birth, and from the time of birth to the time the baby's 1, those cells are replicating at like 100x, right? It's not like a little bit of growth, it's explosive. Right? And if you happen to have a cell that potentially is cancerous, that cell will outpace and grow beyond anything else that's healthy. So the challenge that you have in infants is that they can't express. They're not often weight-bearing, they're not crawling, they're not walking. So when you start looking for the typical symptoms of childhood cancer, like are they tired more often? Well, they're a baby, they sleep a certain number of times a day. Are they not hungry? Well, sometimes babies aren't hungry, depending on, you know, their different needs over the first year of life.
Yes.
Are they bruising easily? But if they're not weight-bearing and you're carrying them, they're not going to bruise. So when you look for those typical signs, they are quite different to infantile cancers. That's why when you see a pediatrician or you see a doctor, being thorough, and listening to a mother's concerns is actually key. Because that mom probably knows more than you do. She can't necessarily express it, but energetically she can pick up something is wrong.
Yes.
And the blood work that my GP did, I mean, doctors aren't fortune tellers. As much as they have all the knowledge in the world, they're going to have bad days, they're going to have good days, they're going to be human, they're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
But blood work will tell you a multitude of things. And thinking, oh, you're going to cause a trauma by doing a small little prick on the arm and taking a vial of blood. If we had done that test when I started voicing my concern around the cancer, probably 6 weeks prior, it may have not changed the outcome, but it would have made a huge difference to how I viewed myself as a mother, how I thought I potentially was going mad, and I would have felt heard and supported.
Right.
And we probably would have eased a lot of the suffering that my son went through in that period.
So at the point after getting the news, and so began the journey of Kieran and yourself and your husband, you know, trying to beat cancer.
It was an inferno. We were bombarded from every angle. So we were only in the process for 5 weeks, 4 days. And that's not even enough time to process the enormity of the diagnosis, never mind what it does to your family structure, what it does in terms of just being able to get your child through every single day, never mind getting them through cancer treatment. It was overwhelming. So I remember the following day when we were transferred to Donald Gordon, the oncologist at the time came to me because they were going to do a bone marrow aspiration, but they already knew from the blood work that this was leukemia. They just wanted to subtype it and make sure that whatever treatment they were going to do would have been the correct choice. And I remember her saying, well, when we do the lumbar punch, we're going to do intrathecal chemo. So I'm like, what? He's an 8-month-old baby. What do you mean you're going to do chemo? I said, can we just like talk about this? Like, can we get a second opinion?
Yeah, just
like,
hold on.
Hey, hang on a second. Like, we got the diagnosis less than 24 hours ago. What do you mean you're going to do intrathecal chemo? And that's basically where they stick chemo into the spine, so it can go into the lumbar and to go into the cerebral spinal fluid. Because obviously the cancer at that point had already proliferated beyond the blood and had crossed the blood-brain barrier. You don't know this at the time.
Yeah.
And I said to her, like, what about his future prospects of having children one day? And do we not like... And she looked at me, she said, if he doesn't have it today, he won't make tonight. So your biggest enemy in that process is not the chemo. It's the time. You do not have time.
Oh, yeah.
You have to dive in blindly. And it is as scary as hell because you have no one to bounce things off. And you're going to take your 8-month-old baby and he's going to become an experiment for chemo. And a lot of these drugs haven't really been tested on children. I mean, nobody goes and sticks their child up as a test case to test chemo. These are adult chemos.
So what is, if just for people who don't understand, chemotherapy. What is it actually? What is it meant to do? And what are the side effects on a typical patient, especially a child?
So I was reading a stat that was saying like the average age of an adult being diagnosed with cancer is probably 60, 65. I think that number's come down. And they were saying, then the life expectancy of that particular individual is reduced dramatically. And that would have been with the traditional chemotherapies of the past. So there's been a lot of leaps and bounds made in chemotherapy, immunotherapy, drugs that are designed specifically for your profile and to target specifically the cancer cells.
Cancer cells, yes.
Okay. When it comes to chemotherapy for children, because of the rapid growth, like I explained, it's greater than what would happen in an adult. You have to treat it a lot more aggressively. And in Karen's case, because it was a leukemia, it wasn't like localized to a tissue or to a particular organ. It was in the blood and it was everywhere, right? It's everywhere. So you can't try and localize it. And it had even spread into the cerebral spinal fluid. So your chemotherapy drugs are cytotoxic. They're often made off drugs that were patented 40 years ago.
And this is specifically when it comes to babies, right?
Well, not specifically to babies. What they do is they effectively take chemotherapy drugs and they look at the weight of the baby and they try and they reduce it down.
Reduce it, yes.
But, I mean, you can't even give a baby a miprodol or a tablet for a headache. You have to give them a Panado syrup, right?
Yeah.
So if for your children, you generally will not give them something which is actually for adult consumption. But when it comes to the war on cancer and childhood cancer, they have to go to every tool they've got at their disposal.
They've got to be as aggressive as the cancer.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, more so.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that's the hard part, because the long-term effects, especially on children, right, is, never mind the fact that, in the formative years, and especially with babies, they're learning to walk, crawl, learning how to talk, learning how to eat. Those things are massive skills that you need to be functioning as a child or as an adult. So never mind the developmental challenges in the formative years where you don't have the ability to go outside, feel grass, play in sand, play with other children, develop your core, crawl, walk, whatever, because you're confined to a hospital bed. Often these children require, and sometimes sadly they relapse, and then they have to go back through this process a couple of years later, or they need things like organ transplants. Sometimes you can do stem cell transplants. So with certain cancers and blood cancers, you can do stem cell transplants. But you need your child then to be completely clear of the cancer. So basically in remission, no evidence of disease. And then you would have to find an exact match, tissue match. And that person would have had to have signed up on a registry, been able to donate stem cells, and then that would then be infused like a drip into this child, and then that would then create new healthy cells. And you would hope that they would live a long and healthy life, but it doesn't come without its challenges and consequences.
Yes, it's not as cut and dry as that. That's what the science says, right? But it changes with every human being. When then did the tiny mighty movement start? Right? When was that decision taken to say that, there's almost a feeling of helplessness as a parent when you've got this small little child that's going through all of this, and that there's not much that you can do, but you want to now see if you can't help others, do others. What was the logic? What was the thinking? What pushed and propelled you to start this movement?
So at the time when he was diagnosed, he was incredibly sick. I mean, his organs were shutting down. He had very low oxygenation levels in his blood, so he needed a blood transfusion, and he also needed platelets. So he was starting to actually hemorrhage. So the platelets is the sticky stuff that keeps the blood together that then flows through your veins. So they are critical. And at the time, when he was diagnosed and he looked so severe, and they were doing the intrathecal chemo and the lumbar punch, they all ordered blood. And at the time, we waited and waited and waited, and we waited more than 12 hours for a bag of blood and platelets to arrive at the hospital. Now, every moment, every hour was critical to his survival, just to get him started in some sort of treatment. And I remember phoning a friend of mine who was at the blood bank, and I was freaking out, and I said to him, "Where is this blood?" And he said, "There's no stock." And I remember thinking to myself, what? How can there be no stock of blood and platelets? And it's an ordeal that no mother or parent or loved one should ever have to go through, knowing that you may not have tomorrow. That's what I'm saying. Your greatest enemy is time.
Yeah.
You may not have tomorrow because you don't have something now as elemental as blood or platelets. So eventually when the blood and platelets arrived, I mean, immediately he bounced back. You can see it like night and day. I mean, he was still incredibly sick, but it gave him the strength to be able to have the next day of chemo and the next step and the next procedure. So we were doing blood and platelet transfusions almost daily. Never mind the chemo and all the other procedures and doctors and being overwhelmed. And one of the oncology doctors said to me, "I think what you should do is you should reach out to your communities and tell people to start donating blood, because we've got a serious problem. It's not only your child, there's so many babies and children and people in theatre or accident victims coming in. And if we're struggling for blood, can you imagine the ripple effect?" And I was really angry at the time. We had just been given the news. You go through that whole grief cycle and the 7 stages, but now it's rapidly condensed. And people were reaching out on social media because we posted a few days later about his diagnosis. And I just said, guys, they were all, the comment that came across was, "Let us know if there's something we can do. We're sending you love and light." And I was angry, and I didn't want love and light. I wanted a cure for my son. You know, like the love and light is great.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
It's nice to write it there.
Yeah.
But go do something. And that's when I started going, okay, I'm going to take that anger. No points for being angry. Let's just put that aside. No points for being frustrated. Go tell people to do something that can make a difference. And I said, go and take that love, care, and concern for my son and go and turn it into something positive. So go donate blood. And I spoke about, the critical need for blood, how long we had waited. I said, and if that's not going to work for you, then maybe go sign up to be a stem cell donor. And all that is a cheek swab, right? A lot of people think it's some horrible invasive procedure. It's a cheek swab. I mean, anybody can have a earbud shoved in their cheek for it to go and be tissue typed, right? So that's not really tough to do. I said, or otherwise go and support charities like CHOC, like Rainbows and Smiles, like Cupcakes for Kids with Cancer. Go support those charities because they do amazing work in the community.
Yeah, so the Tiny Mighty movement, you said, happened because your son couldn't pronounce your name, not your name, Kieran's name, right?
So he called him Tiny Baby from the time he was born. So we kept on referring to him as Tiny. And then because of the fact that now he was in hospital, and he must have felt terrible. I mean, being 8 months old and being at death's door and having all these procedures done, not once did he look upset or worked up or angry or crying. He was still a very happy, smiley little boy in ICU. And I remember saying to my husband before we walked into ICU the one day, because we just couldn't contain our emotions. Every time we saw our baby in that state, we would just burst into tears. And I remember saying to my husband, when you walk in there, you smile and you clap and you impart positive energy to him because he doesn't know what he's facing.
Yes.
He's just in that moment. So we had to walk in there with our hearts breaking, clapping, smiling, trying to hold back the tears. And he would just clap along with us.
He'd reciprocate.
He would reciprocate.
Yes.
And it was so amazing to see. And so as a result of that happy little spirit and his nickname being Tiny, we realized that although he is so tiny, Tiny can indeed be mighty. And that's where Tiny the Mighty started. And that's why when we started branding blood drives or getting involved in community-led initiatives around childhood cancer awareness, we used the name Tiny the Mighty. Most people didn't know his name was Kieran. And that's where we started because it was that tiny little baby who inspired us with his happy little spirit.
Right.
And he just took it on with the heart of a lion. And I think too often in life we get so wrapped up in the big things. You know, we get wrapped up in it's the wedding or it's, you know, something momentous like that trip overseas or whatever it is. You don't realize life is made up of tiny iterative moments, and those in themselves are blessings. And you need to live for those tiny moments, because once you get the tiny things done right, the big things take care of themselves.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously you were inspired by your son and his story and what you had to go through as a family. When did you know that he wasn't going to make it, and when did you know that there's no way that I'm not going to allow his legacy not to live?
So I think the hard part is at the time when he was diagnosed, I was looking for stories of hope. Right? You start trying to reach out to people who potentially had something similar happen, to find someone who had a similar story with a similar aged baby, same kind of diagnosis, and what the outcome was. And from the outset, you know, the doctors will always give you hope, because they are also going to try and work their damnedest to save your child. But they also don't want to give you any assurances, because it's such a unpredictable thing, especially with the age and how severely ill he was when he was diagnosed.
Yep.
So I think from the minute I heard the diagnosis, and like I said, when he was born and I held him for the first time, I knew I was on borrowed time. I don't know why, but it was like on a gut level, on an intuitive level.
Yeah.
And I remember when I heard the diagnosis and that night I had to spend with him in hospital, I remember pleading that it wasn't now. Like, he doesn't get taken now. You know, like, let's just get him through this. Like, we'll get him through. So you start using that positive mentality and mindset you've always fostered to ensure that you'll get him through. Like, we'll make a plan. No matter what, this is in our control. We've got this, right? And, I mean, he went through the first 3 weeks of chemo like a champ. There was no side effects. He blossomed. Like, from the day he was diagnosed to 2 weeks in, you wouldn't know it was the same child.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Looked amazing.
Wow.
And I've got videos of him, and he looked so vibrant and beautiful. And then post 3 weeks, and now they literally had knocked all the cancer out of his body. So effectively, he had no cancer. But what did happen was it also knocks your immune system. So you have zero immune system. And often what happens with cancer patients is they don't die as a result of the cancer. They die as a result of secondary infections that your body would pick up as a result of having zero immune system.
Yes.
So he started having some stomach challenges. They had to put in a nasal gastric tube to feed him because he couldn't process breast milk. He started with a few ulcers in his mouth, and he started spiking fevers, and there were some like virus, bacterial infections that were affecting him. So it was probably, I remember it was the 1st of September, and my son had never seen spring blossoms. He was born in the November before, and we had been in hospital for about 3-4 weeks at the time, and I was so desperate to just take him in the pram and take him outside to see spring blossoms. But I couldn't, because he's hooked up to so many different machines. And, you know, in the ICUs and that, it's so sterile. It's like you know, there's no windows, you know, and I'm thinking, my son hasn't even seen, you know, spring blossoms, been able to stand on, you know, grass, hasn't even been able to crawl because he's been in a bed. And they wouldn't allow him out because of his immune system being so low. We had to be in masks and sanitizing. And I remember on the 1st of September, I had a bit of a feeling that this isn't going to be long. And yeah, on the 9th of September, when we got the phone call from the hospital to say, come, that was ultimately the day he passed away. I kind of already knew that it probably was the end. Yeah.
And he passed away on the 9th of September, right?
Yeah, the
That
9th
was
of
the day.
September.
Yeah.
And so what we had done in the process around the Tiny the Mighty movement and the work we were doing around blood drives is when he was diagnosed and we were saying to people, go and donate blood, I got hold of the blood bank and I said, why don't we do a blood drive in Dainfern? And the weekend, the 8th and 9th of September, is the blood drive that we did in Dainfern. And it was hard because I knew that we were running out of time now in terms of him in the ICU. And I mean, they set up a massive marquee. We had, I think, 250, 280 people come over the weekend. Usually blood drives, when you see these marquees set up, they get 22 people a day. I mean, we had people from all over Joburg come. It was such an amazing weekend.
Yeah.
But it was so hard knowing I'm on borrowed time here. And we lost him on the morning of the 9th of September.
Yeah.
But it was the weekend that we had a massive blood drive. And we decided in that process to continue the blood drives post the 9th of September when he passed away in honor of his life and legacy. So that, you know, his life meant something. And for someone else going through something really tough, whether it is childbirth or an infant in ICU needing blood, or someone going through cancer treatment, or an accident patient coming in, if my story or message inspired one person who wasn't a blood donor before to donate blood, or if somebody went and decided to become a stem cell donor and became a match, we would use his life and legacy to mean something. Because 9 months, you think to yourself, well, what can you do in 9 months? I just became the vessel or the mechanism. He was the inspiration.
Yes.
So what exactly is the work that you are doing through the organization, and how do you go about it?
So, I mean, it's not a registered organization, it's more a movement. So whenever we post anything, it's around Tiny the Mighty. So I do a lot of education and awareness around childhood cancer. I talk at various events when certain charities reach out to me because they want a story. Obviously, everybody's looking for the story of hope.
Yeah.
And although my story is one of loss, it is ultimately of life and love, because you've got to keep that person's life and the love that they brought into the world alive. You need to keep that moving forward.
Yeah, right.
That impact that they would have on the world. I would continue. My husband, my son, I mean, he's 8, and my son was only 3 at the time when he lost his brother. Every speech he does at school, he talks about his baby brother, who's an angel now, and he had cancer. And he talks about him as though he still lives and breathes, and he's with us every day.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, so community-led blood drives, we try and encourage that to be a personal story, because I think people are quite apathetic. They almost assume that when they get into a situation like we were in hospital, that there just would be blood and platelets until something happens to them. So that encouraging that being an active participant.
Yeah.
So continued with blood drives, less so now that I've gone back to work full time, but continue with blood drives, encouraging people to become stem cell or organ donors. And at one point in time, I was not necessarily counselling would be the wrong word, but acting as a support for parents that were going through something similar.
Yes.
They would reach out to me.
Right.
And a lot of times people don't want to talk to somebody who lost a child through cancer. They're like, why the hell am I talking to you? Like, I'm in this battle. I don't want to talk to somebody who lost a child through cancer. I want to talk to people who only have the stories of hope.
Yeah.
But I hope through my son's journey and through our story of what we've inspired, you know, people don't see it as a heavy thing. They see it as almost like a testament to love and love living beyond the physical.
Yeah.
Where would you say you'd gain the strength from? Because it's a difficult thing to talk about. It's a difficult thing to deal with as a parent. And I'm asking this so that we can be able to help inspire or give hope to those people that are probably down in that dark hole right now. Because if it might not be cancer, it might be the death of a parent, it might be the death of a loved one, it might be the loss of a job, it might be the loss of sight, whatever, because loss is something that we have to deal with in life, and very, very few people know how to go beyond that. And I don't think there's anybody that can be as hard tested as a parent losing a child, especially to cancer, and not knowing you can do it, and knowing that you cannot do anything about it.
Yeah.
So loss is going to be your greatest teacher. It's going to strip you bare. It's going to make you vulnerable. But I think what you need to tap into when you are faced with something really hard is you need to tap into courage. And courage comes from the Latin word of cure, which is C-O-U-E-R, which means heart, right? And courage is that little voice inside of you that goes, I will persevere and I will persist. Bravery is an action that comes as a result of courage. Bravery is the action. But you first need that ability to tap into courage. And if you think of courage being the Latin word for heart or cure, it comes from the heart. So often in my posts, which I put on social media when I talk to people, is love makes you brave. And it comes from tapping into that deep part of yourself that you know that the love for your child, the love for life, the love to try and just make the world a better place because he lived and because of the fact that you could inspire positive effects. That is what you need to tap into.
Yeah.
And when you're scared and when you're feeling down and out, based off my experience, that's when you need to lean in twice as hard. That's when you need to live twice as hard because my little one didn't get the chance. And that's what I've used in my outlook on life.
Yeah.
And that's what I often say to my son. And I would say that to anyone who's going through something really tough is you need to look beyond just the ego or beyond the current circumstances because there's something deep down inside of all of us. And as human beings and just, you know, life in general, our biggest driver is not just to survive, it's to thrive. Right? If you look at a baby when they're born in ICU and they fight so hard, right? And they fight and they fight and they fight and eventually they, you know, happy, healthy, you know, 30-year-olds, you know, but the odds were so stacked against them. But they didn't just want to survive. They thrived. It's within all of us.
Right, yeah.
You need to tap into that. And I'm not unique. I mean, I'm not the first person to have lost a child. I'm not the first person to have gone through hardship. We are the product of thousands of ancestors before us that went through worse. Okay, they never maybe spoke about it, but they had a community that maybe supported them, or they suffered in silence. But we are here today because of people before us.
Yeah,
and they went through really hard stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, when I did my Ironman journey, I it was painful.
Yeah.
Kalanga knows because I'd always complain to him. It was probably one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
And I think almost like my true north was always the fact that no matter how much pain I'm going through, it'll never equate to what Sharon is going through as a result of losing a husband or her children as a result of losing their father, or any family for that matter that has lost a loved one because of a reckless or drunk driver. My pain that I'm suffering right now, I can take painkillers, I can maybe go, you know, for a salt bath, I can maybe go for a massage, and it might go away, but these will remain with them forever. And I think you gain strength from that to keep going on and going on and going on and just, you know, seeing it through to another day.
Yeah, that's true.
We're almost heading to the end of our conversation. But I have two last questions. And as far as blood donation is concerned, one would think it's you simply go out and you sit. It probably takes about
20 minutes maybe.
20 minutes to donate a liter?
No. A litre, I think you would be dead.
Oh, is it?
No, it's not a litre. I think it's about 300 mils.
300 mils.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then you get an orange.
And a biscuit.
And a biscuit.
And a biscuit.
I don't know. I don't really eat the orange and the biscuit. I take a thing of Coke with me, and I just use that to prop up my sugar levels.
Yeah.
But it is something that's really selfless, and it's something that's very easy to do.
Yeah.
There are a lot of donor centres across the country.
Yeah.
In all the major cities and towns. You could pop onto the snbs.org website and go and have a look at where the donor centres are. And I think what is quite key is when you do see these community-led blood drives, think of a few scenarios, right? It doesn't have to be somebody who, like, you know, my story with childhood cancer, but I think everyone has someone they know who's been affected with cancer.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you can think of that, but a lot of these cancer patients or autoimmune disease patients often need regular blood and platelet transfusions in order for them to get through their treatment. Then you've got mothers in childbirth and infants in childbirth. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows somebody who's about to have a baby, right? When something hits the fan in that delivery and they need blood or platelets, you don't want to find out that there isn't.
Yeah.
And if you can make the difference of saving that life, you need to start thinking of those scenarios, because there are quite a few circumstances that you're going to face in your life, or a loved one is going to be in a position and they're going to be saved due to the selfless act of someone donating blood or platelets. I think it's something that potentially big business and the SANBS should look at doing collectively. Because if I look at people who are fairly healthy, who go for their vitality or momentum, multiply health checks, you know, you want safe, regular, consistent blood donations.
Yeah.
Right? You don't want a once-off. So it's all fine and well you do it once-off. But you want to almost keep that person in the system so that there's regular blood being donated. If you could, and I think this would be a challenge, so I'm putting it out there, but I mean, if I was Discovery Vitality and I knew people try and get to their gold or diamond status, and you go for your health check and you go for a whole lot of stuff, if you went and did 2 or 3 donations in a year and that gave you 5,000 points to add to your vitality status and potentially push you into the next tier, isn't that a good way to encourage people to go and do something? Because actually the private medical aids, never mind public, government organizations are the biggest consumers of the blood for their patients.
Yeah.
I've been holding that one, sorry.
Would you like something to drink? You're right.
No, good.
Shame, you've been really holding that.
I have. Have you been to see it change colour?
So this is the question, right? So it seems like a fairly easy process to go through, to go and donate blood.
Oh, so this is finally the question, hey?
But yet there seems to be such a big
Stigma.
It's not a stigma. I think there's the demand far outstrips the supply. Why is that? Is it a way that you've spoken about what big corporates can do in medical aids? That's probably one aspect. But what is the big driver behind that? Because there always seems to be a shortage of blood supply. Is it accessibility? Is it awareness?
So I think it's, maybe I'm looking at it too academically. I think it's got to do with your levels of evolution on your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I suppose,
right.
and the self-actualization and doing, philanthropic activities, doing something for the greater good can only be effected if you're not living in survival mode. Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of this country is living in that, under that cloud of every day we are surviving, right? And when a child gets diagnosed or someone's really sick, you can't stop, right? You have to keep on surviving. And I think, if you look at more developed economies and first world countries, obviously education and awareness is one aspect, but the wanting to do more in a community sense is sort of inculcated at the grassroots level. Okay, so I think there's a challenge there because of the fact that we are sitting in massive poverty and people just trying to get by.
So donating blood is the last thing on their mind.
Correct. Yeah. And I also think that the marketing messages haven't always, in my opinion, landed well. And I only started realizing the value of those messages when we were in the process, right? Because it's not personal and it's not hitting a nerve, right? Because we had people come to donate blood because of our story, that's how we got a lot of people in to those drives. And when you actually have a story that you can relate and people can identify, you have a greater ability to influence people to donate than just having a marketing message on the N1 saying, save a life, donate blood.
Yeah.
It's random. It doesn't hit you on the warm and fuzzies.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot that could be done there.
Yeah. How much blood are we getting, and how much is needed versus how much is needed?
I remember the stats a while ago. I think we needed like 3,300 units donated a day in order to stable for critical.
3,300.
Yeah, per day.
Per day.
That had to be donated in order to stable for critical outage. I could be wrong, but that was when I did some research a while ago. When we're running at like really low levels, I mean, it's also the logistics, right? So they take the blood, they test the blood, they ensure that the blood is clean. You obviously can't transfer something to someone who is immune compromised, and there's something in the blood that could actually make that person react.
So the blood has to come out clean.
Yeah, and they do a lot of rigorous testing, especially for cancer patients, because of the fact that they're so immune compromised. Then it's the logistics of getting the blood to the hospital, right? And then it's actually then transfusing it in the patient. So it actually runs really well in that sense.
Right.
But you need a greater supply in order to make a massive impact. So obviously they keep stores of blood. I think they try and keep 3 days of rolling stock at the blood bank. And when it drops below that, that's when they start struggling, right? That's when they start struggling, because then they know based off that they're going to really struggle to get blood to where they need to. At one stage they had the drone project. I'm not sure if that's still running. where they would actually use like these industrial type drones. They would stick blood or platelets in a cooler box, which was sealed, and they would actually have a drone pilot, and they would fly it to far-flung reaches and areas and rural areas to get blood to people quicker than if they had to do it by road, or they would send it straight from either certain hospitals or the blood bank themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Natalie, thank you very much for spending your day with us today. Your stories are, of one of inspiration, and one that I think, sticks to the ethos of what we're trying to do, which is about living beyond and finding purpose in your life. Yeah. What is the message that you'd like, to send to people out there, to mothers, to parents, to fathers, to anyone, in fact, about, living that ethos of living beyond? You spoke about, living for purpose, and living in the moment. But, what keeps you going every single day? How do we inspire others, and how do we get people to get, beyond their own finish line in terms of life or adversity or tragedy?
So I think the first thing is tiny can be mighty, and that's where tiny the mighty comes from. And it doesn't matter how small your act of kindness or love is, it has a butterfly effect or a ripple effect where that small act could create a massive momentum. And I've seen it in our own lives with what we've been through. Tapping into bravery and love is something that you should embrace. And the ability to be vulnerable and authentic with people and telling them your story. I've had so many people, and I often wonder, it's been a couple of years on since my son's passed, every time I post an awareness campaign or message around childhood cancer, I always think, is the story aging? Do people really want to hear this? They know the story, right, on my socials. Just yesterday, I had a few people reach out to me in my personal capacity saying thank you, because that gave them the strength to actually realize what they were going through, could be conquered, and it's not insurmountable. And it could have been a multitude of things that they were dealing with. So I think you should never underestimate the impact that your story and your survival has on other people. And there is strength in that vulnerability. So I think those would be my 3 key messages: is tiny can be mighty, love makes you brave, and effectively love never dies, because every action will just keep on having a ripple effect, and strength and vulnerability.
Awesome. Keep going.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And and please donate blood, guys. I'm definitely more aware about it, and it's about time to take it. When was the last time you donated?
I've absolutely got no idea. And the worst thing for me, I was just listening to Natalie's stories. I live next to the South African National Blood Services office.
Right.
So I drive past it all the time. So it's in my mind's eye all the time. But as you say, where do we find the time? Where do we actually want to sit down and take that 20 minutes of our lives and actually do it?
Are we making a commitment to do it?
I'm making a commitment and going to make an effort. I don't know how clean my blood is, but they can have.
They'll clean it up. They'll clean
it up.
The process works well.
But thank you very much for raising awareness around this, and we really, really appreciate your time, and thank you for being a part of the movement with Beyond the Finish Line and our Live Beyond podcast.
Well, when you go donate, I'll come with you. I'll hold your hand.
Oh, awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.